Kevin Gallagher. I was supposed to be a panelist in this session representing Boston University's Global Development Policy Center. Instead, now I'm the moderator representing Boston University Global Development Policy Center, where I'm a senior, not resident, senior fellow after I retired from the United Nations a year ago. So, without spending any more time to that, we can give maximum time to the panelists. I just start with some overall messages that I'd like to put on the table for the whole panel and the panelists, and then I'll call upon each panelist to maybe spend 7-8 minutes, if possible, not much more than that, so that we don't go too much over time. Allow enough time for Q&A. Just start with 6 overall points. First, trade and trade rules are only a means to an end. We often forget that. The end, at least from where I come, is human development. Not just economic growth or even economic results, but human development. And that should be the overall goal of the end. Second, to effectively deal with climate change and a green energy transformation, and I think the last session and panel made this quite clear, the world will need a structural economic transformation, but one which deals not just with the concerns of the rich world, of the United States, the European Union, Japan, and the G7 in general, but which concretely addresses the needs of developing countries and the global south so that they are not left behind. Third, multilateral, regional, and bilateral trade rules and agreements will urgently need to be transformed to facilitate the broader green energy transformation. Fourth, a one-size-fits-all approach to trade and trade rules has not so far and will not in the future work. Applying identical rules to unequal members locks weaker countries into unsatisfactory trade relationships and fails to address their development challenges. This was true in the past for industrial transformation, when it was not green, and it will also be true and apply to green industrial transformation. Fifth, policy space and deference to national policy goals and institutions, which encourage new national capacities in the global south, will ultimately be more successful in meeting both domestic development challenges and tackling global crises. And sixth, state intervention to enable a green industrial transformation remains crucial to deal with structural market failures. This has been recognized by the People's Republic of China. It has also recently been recognized by the Biden administration in the recent misnamed US Inflation Reduction Act, which involves a large amount of public funds-based subsidies, not allowed by the WTO, I might add, to build green technology industries, including in renewable energy. If both China and the United States, as well as the EU even, are pouring billions of US dollars into green industrial policy, they will leap ahead once again, locking in global inequality. Unless there is a reform of the global trade rules, particularly trade-related intellectual property rights and the TRIMS agreement, the trade-related industrial measures, unless these are reformed significantly, we are going to see a further increase in global inequality if only the rich countries can pour in billions of dollars into their green transformation. So the global south urgently needs to use a combination of measures, and this is where a lot of the discussion from the previous panel on development finance becomes very relevant. We need state intervention, use of much greater enhanced development finance institutions in developing countries, but also the multilateral development banks and their capital, and everything that's already been said, so I don't need to repeat that. So we need the multilateral development banks also to use guarantees to bring in the private sector, because everyone recognizes that without large amounts of private capital flows, you're not going to see this green industrial transformation. But the role of the MDBs is not just therefore in terms of large capital increases from the MDBs, but also their role as guarantor, which reduces the cost of capital for the private sector. I'll stop here. Some of these points were going to be my points as a panelist, but I thought I could start as a moderator and make these overall points as well. And I'll now ask Professor Nagesh Kumar, the director of ISID, as the first speaker, to make his points, and you can do the narrating. Thanks, Nagesh.
Thank you, Kamal. For actually setting the stage for what I'm going to talk about, could I have my slides? Yeah. So I think, as Kamal said just now, trade should be seen as the means and not the end. But when we were writing the rules, trade rules, the last was done in the times of the Uruguay round, which kind of led to establishment of WTO. There was no discussion of climate change, sustainability, clean transition, green transition. So these were not the issues. And so trade negotiators were really working as if trade was the end. And, so they were written in the heydays of globalization. When, and so you know about the agreement, trade-related intellectual property, trade-related investment hedges, Kamal just did. So trade was the supreme and most important objective of the global economy. That is how the rules were written. Now, increasingly, you find that these, these rules come into conflict with the development agenda, which is becoming increasingly and should become increasingly a green development. Or sustainable development. So, in that context, I think the whole WTO is rule making structure and the existing need to be reconfigured, relooked at, and taken and made fit for purpose for the sustainability kind of debate. And that is precisely what I'm going to do in the few slides, just to give you some examples of how conflicts between these trade rules and the sustainable development agenda, climate change, comes up. So, for instance, we're talking of green transition, net zero, and by 2050, and that would require global deployment of renewable energy capacity expanding in a very unprecedented scale. So International Energy Agency has put out some numbers. So solar PV capacity additions need to expand or quadruple to 630 gigawatts per year, by 2030 to be able to be on track for net zero target by 2050. India, by itself, I mean, in the past 7 years, we have done great work in terms of expanding our renewable energy capacity, which grew from 39 gigawatts to 151 gigawatts in 7 years. And now it is the fourth largest globally. But look at the targets. 2030, we have set for ourselves 500 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity, and share in total energy by 50%. So from 150 to 500 in just 7 years we need to achieve. So these are the very challenging targets, and they need to be backed by major expansion of solar PV production capacity, photovoltaic solar panels. And currently, that industry is totally dominated by one country, China, which has more than 80% share of all aspects of solar PV equipment. So high concentration of photovoltaic supply chains brings vulnerabilities. So one issue is the expansion of the capacity, but also diversification of this capacity. Different countries should be able to produce this and help in deployment of renewable energy all across the world. Now, many countries are actually trying to do that. And come refer to the President Biden announcing several measures in the course of last 6 to 8 months. He authorized in June 2022 the Defense Production Act and super preferences under Buy America Act, including domestic content requirements for spurring the local manufacture or manufacturing of solar power equipment. Then under Inflation Reduction Act, it is $700 billion kind of spending under that. Major tax breaks and incentives are offered to the producers of these equipment. Germany, Denmark, China, Brazil, Spain, and other countries have used extensively domestic content regulations or requirements for all kinds of equipment capacity, production capacity. But when India tried to impose the domestic content regulations some years ago, India was taken to the WTO court because they are inconsistent with the TRIPS requirements. So, and then actually WTO ruled against India, and India had to withdraw these domestic content requirements. But now, look around the world, many countries are doing that. So, obviously, you feel that this tool of industrial policy is helpful, and you need to have that policy flexibility or policy space to implement that. So that comes into conflict with the trade rules of WTO. And so we need to retrieve that policy space for green transition, either through a review of TRIPS or through a peace clause. That, okay, for when you are using these tools for climate-related production capacity, forget about the TRIPS. So something like that. So basically, the point is that multilateral trade rules need to be updated for a new climate action, realities. Another example will be about TRIPS. We all know, and there was a discussion in the morning, that finance and technology are two major challenges for clean transition. So, notwithstanding the renewable energy focus that India and many other countries have, coal will continue to be an important source for many emerging markets. And you have this coal, and you have these investments in thermal power plants. What do you do with them? You abandon them completely. It is not possible for emerging and developing. So, but there are technologies. So while you are trying to expand the renewable energy capacity, and over time that will become the major bulk of your production, but gradually it has to happen gradually. And for the foreseeable future, coal will stay as an important source. So what do you do with that? And so there are technologies which can help to bring down the carbon footprints of coal-based thermal power. Same applies to the retrofitting of other industries, cement, fertilizer, steel. So you need you have these new technologies which can help to bring down the carbon footprints of these industries. while you do the transition, and you need to have access to these technologies in very affordable and more accessible manner. And there you run into conflict with TRIPS sectors, where most of these new technologies have become proprietary technologies for So the one example of the past I wanted to bring, which is that in India, the green revolution, all of us are beholden to the fact that green revolution was implemented and we became food, not only food self-sufficient, but food surplus country, net export country. And that happened because of implementation of green revolution. How did it happen? It happened because Indian public sector or public funded research institutions were provided basic technology by what is called as CGIAR, the Consultative Group on International Agriculture Research. Their laboratories provided the basic jump to Indian public funded research system, agriculture research system. So replicating and adapting those high-yielding varieties for Indian conditions. And so rapidly we implemented the high-yielding varieties and became self-sufficient. So if that technology was not provided as a global public good to India, really, we would still be, importing food, possibly. So the green transition down will need to be also supported by similar international action for environmentally sustainable technologies, for climate action, provided as global public goods. And otherwise, we run a very serious risk of the developing countries who cannot afford some of those technologies not fulfilling the net zero target. So what can be done? TRIPS review. TRIPS actually is an agreement which under Article 66.2 has provided provision for transfer technology. However, that provision was never implemented. It was left as a sort of something thinking, but to be spelled out. And now it is time to spell it out. I'm just coming into it. So I think so we need to look at the WTO trade rules in a very dispassionate and in tune with the new climate reality. They need to be revised, reformed, and refactored. So concluding, what is in it for G20 policy agenda? I think this is my last slide. So sustainability concerns demand a fresh approach to multilateral trade negotiations, giving primacy to planet, so people rather than trade. Trade is a means and not the end. That is what we need to bring up. And so policy space needs to be restored, review or reform of multilateral trade rules for industrial policy tools to expand the manufacturing base of environmentally sensitive products and equipment to achieve net zero. And that means TRIPS agreement could be reviewed or a peace clause could be brought to restore the domestic content requirement kind of policy tools for environmental goods and services. Then technology transfer provisions of TRIPS agreement need to be made effective, especially for environmentally sensitive technology. And now maybe the time, I think it's a futuristic thinking. Now, today in the 1990s and 80s, we were writing trade-related rules, for bringing new agenda on the table. Maybe it is time to write new rules for environmental related trade measures, environment-related investment measures, environment-related intellectual property measures, and to accelerate the climate action, and or a new element of transfer, which was actually the demand of development countries many years in WTO. So, and consensus needs to be built in G20 summits and UNFCCC talks for WTO reform before going to WTO. So, if larger countries some members of WTO have agreed on something, then WTO reform would be far more easier. And international cooperation on public provision of environmentally sustainable technology, which has been defeated off and on, but how when it happens is something to be seen. So I stop here and thank you very much.
Thank you, Nagesh, for that very rich and substantive presentation. Obviously, I'm not going to go over it, but I just want to highlight 3 points you made, which I think were really particularly important. One is, indeed, renewable energy will be a critical test. The ability to scale up, quadruple it, as you said, that will be, I think, a real test case of the future success or not of a green industrial transformation. If we can't do it in renewable energy, then I don't think. Secondly, what I said in my opening comments, policy space, and you highlighted particularly domestic content requirements and many examples, including the US and others, these are against WTO rules as they currently stand. So clearly, we need what you call a peace clause, what I would call a waiver or carve-outs in the rules. There are precedents for that. If you take agricultural subsidies, if you take fishery subsidies, these are, and we've got the waiver clause in TRIPS for public health. So there are precedents, there are ways to address this without even a dramatic transformation. And you need the consensus in the right bodies. The last point I'll said that you are looking at the future of environment-related, trade-related, environment added to being the context of everything. I would argue that even before we do that, WTO highlights trade and investment treaties must prioritize the enforcement of already existing multilateral climate change conventions and agreements. For example, the Paris Agreement. They can do this in many ways by collaboration, climate finance, and indeed in cost-effective technologies for lower emissions should be high on the priority list. So, with that, thank you again. And I'll now ask the second speaker, Dr. Kim Wing-Chung, President of the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy in Seoul, to make his presentation.
Thank you very much. In this very and I want to share some issues that you tension between bilateral trade and agreements. So it's clear to use the protectionist measure to necessarily protect and support attractive green industries, limit competition, and discourage the spread of pollution given by other countries. So there are many instances that decarbonization industries lead to trade conflict related to especially subsidies. In fact, as a core of the climate change policy package, many countries are taking subsidies for the generation and supply of renewable energy power, with batteries, and R&D to secure most of the change policy packages. But then the problem lies for such in industries, transportation, lead to a risk of conflict between bilateral trade rules and multilateral agreements. But as subsidies are expected to be used more and more to mitigate the climate change, trade conflict may be defeated and prolonged if fundamental solutions are not found. So, in this context, I'd like to raise some suggestions. First, we need to re-establish the relationship between multilateral trade and multilateral environmental agreements. In the post of the negotiation of MEA, it is necessary to define more clearly the types and scope of measures that can be taken pursuant to the MEA. In addition, within the multilateral trade rules, it is also necessary to seek ways to ensure the trade measures implemented under the MEA are not inconsistent with the multilateral trade rules. It would be useful to think of yes dispute settlement mechanism that can address the trade dispute related to climate change and the green industrial transformation within the multilateral trade system through discussion, negotiation, and dispute settlement procedure. Such a mechanism should be able to deal with the trade measure taken by a country pursuant to MEAs. It should guarantee transparency and should be able to conduct legal and scientific assessment based on accurate findings. In addition, it should be possible to accurately identify and evaluate whether there is trade restrictive to achieve the same environmental objective, taking into account rapidly changing technology. Secondly, with respect to green subsidies, it is necessary to consider reintroducing non-actionable subsidies on Article 8 of the WTO subsidies agreement recorded as CM. Let me recall the non-actionable subsidies. It previously stipulated in 8 originally for 5 years. The date of entry into force of the WTO agreement and legally expired as of December 31st of 1999, so long ago, without further extension. So there were previously 3 types of non-actionable subsidies under the WTO SCM agreement, as you know, including R&D subsidies, Israel subsidies, and also subsidies for adaptation to. So newly adopted provisions need to specifically define terms or at least non-action subsidies indicated in to reflect today's climate and environmental objective for climate neutrality and green industrial transformations. It will be also possible to consider reintroducing the non-action subsidy of adding a reputable presumption clause to make it easier for WTO members to reach consensus on the provisions. With respect to the previous non-action subsidies clause, it is known that the members will be given their views to establish a permanent exemption clause for 3 categories of subsidies. It is very strong incentive to do that permanent. But determining the permanent permissible subsidy category may be burdensome, depending on the interest of each country. So, alternatively, other countries could still be able to rebut the crime of face the presumption. There are certain subsidies granted non-actionable, and for the claim, the subsidized member is using illegal subsidies. So we need to introduce non-actionable subsidies, but more lighter forms. And thirdly, the relationship between environmental measures for global climate mitigation and WTO multilateral trade rules needs to clarify through a climate exemption, or we call climate waiver. The adoption of climate rules is the core for free trade and sustainable objective that WTO pursues. According to Article 9, paragraph 3 of the WTO agreement, the WTO Ministerial Conference may decide to waive the obligation by 3/4 majority vote in exceptional circumstances. And fourthly, it is necessary to clarify the meaning of multilateral trade rules applicable to trade measures for environmental purpose. Through this, it will be possible to protect trading partners from unnecessary adverse trade effect that may occur in the course of implementing environmental policies, and to enhance the stability and predictability of international trade relations. For instance, we could consider the ways of clarifying the meaning of the requirement under the environmental exception of that Article 20. Since its inception in 1995 up to this date, the Article 21.5 PSU appellate body report on U.S. shrimp case is the only case where an argument for an exception under Article 20 has been accepted by the Cabinet Parliament. The environmental exceptions have been strictly interpreted, and moreover, the meaning of each environmental requirement, including the environmental exception, is not sufficiently defined within the law itself. As such, it is necessary to clarify the scope of measures that fall under that Article 20. In this context, I think the assertive interpretation pursuant to Article 9 of the WTO agreement can be used to further clarify the meaning of environmental provisions in the WTO multilateral trade rules. In accordance with Article 2 of the WTO agreement adoption, our assertive interpretation can be made by a three-fourths majority vote of member countries. Through this, the interpretation and application of multilateral trade rules that are practically environmentally friendly will be possible without any official matter. And fifth, no matter how much trade measures are taken for environmental purposes without protectionist intentions, unilateral measures cannot be a unilateral solution, and the multilateral measures must be sought to harmonize climate policies and trade rules in the mid and long term. So, as opposed to the public international law, unilateral measures taken by countries' domestic laws are not based on mutual agreement between countries. So, therefore, foreign governments are to resist attributing their subsidy policies to the jurisdiction of other countries, and it will be very difficult to achieve significant impact. In order to effectively deal with the transboundary impacts that occur beyond the borders, such as climate change subsidies, international cooperation must be premised. Mechanisms and procedures are needed to enhance transparency through strengthened notification and information sharing. For this, the important task is to derive a minimum threshold of common understanding that all countries can agree on either laterally or bilaterally, including as many parties as possible. So it is necessary to make it clear that unilateral measures based on domestic law are not the only policy options reasonably available to each country, and efforts should be made to publicize issues and ultimately induce multilateral discussions. For example, in the WTO, the trade and environmental sustainability structured discussions, what we call TSDD, initiative was launched on November 2020, expected to play a more active role in strengthening discussions on trade and environment in the near future. So last and not least, although the WTO does not have a complete solution to environmental solution, the direction for multilateral trade rules should be to promote, not hinder, the implementation of climate measures to reduce carbon emissions and to promote the greener industrial transformation. So, multilateral trade system should be able to liberalize trade, make sure that environmental policies do not become obstacle to trade, but at the same time ensure that trade rules do not interfere with adequate domestic environmental protection. So trade policies and environmental policies must be mutually supportive and complementary. You would not be able to achieve the climate goals in the mid and to long term without properly functioning multilateral trade systems. Thank you very much. 감사합니다.
Thank you, Dr. John, for that substantive presentation. And I think just to highlight 2 points. One is the potential for conflict between trade rules and multilateral environmental agreements, but also you listed out a whole range of ways within which even the existing multilateral trade rules can be able to provide carve-outs, flexibilities, etc., to prioritize more environment-friendly trade rules. And so what you're saying, which some may agree, some may not agree, but what you're saying is that you don't need a radical transformation of the current multilateral trade regime to allow it to be more environment friendly. And you've got the whole race of articles and Article 8, the SCM, etc. And what you're arguing for is, I think, interesting, is the reintroduction of non-actionable subsidies in lighter forms, which were phased out in 1999. And you're basically saying that they should now be reintroduced to make them redefined, to prioritize more environmental related non-actionable subsidies. And that this is possible within the existing trade rules. So thank you very much again. And I now turn to Professor Renato Woman of IPA, the Institute of Applied Economic Research in Brasilia.
Thank you. Good afternoon, all. Let me start by thanking Professor Kuhlmann for inviting me to this event. When it comes to multilateral trade rules and industrial transformation, green industrial transformation, I think that there are four major threats affecting trade based on environmental concerns. The first one is, of course, that the norms of the multilateral trade system deal only marginally with environmental issues. There's no agreement regulating the relationship between trade and environment. There are specific aspects, and in this regard, I think my presentation is complementary to Professor Schwan. There are specific aspects of environmental measures that might directly or indirectly affect trade, such as the initiatives to stimulate the reduction of tariff protection for environmental goods. The binding constraint here is precisely to define what are environmental goods, as well as the whole debate about whether this set should or should not comprise agricultural goods, which is a quite sensitive issue for developing economies. In 2021, the DAC12 members have dealt with the effects of environmental measures and market access via the reform and subsidies to fossil fuels, the informal dialogue on plastic pollution and environmentally sustainable plastic trade, and then the EU informed about its open, sustainable and assertive trade policy, as well as the creation of the carbon border adjustment mechanism, CBAM, which is the most sensitive and controversial topic, bound to have very significant impact on our economies, even more those economies that are exporters of natural goods. There is, of course, the recent, in 20th February, proposal by the EU aiming at reinforcing the Committee on Trade and Environment to become the key global forum to deal with environmental measures that have impact on trade, the deliberation on technical methodologies and circular economy, in coordination with other relevant WTO committees, TPT, SPS, subsidies and countervailing measures in agriculture. And this is a point of sort of strategy to bring these issues to those committees, and I'll come back to that later. The second track, complementary approach, is the set of works by OECD, who deals with the intersection of trade and environment from a broader perspective. OECD focus on the OECD focus is on establishing standards and guidelines for the global governance, with emphasis on green growth and sustainability by dealing with issues such as air pollution, agriculture and environment, clean energy, consumption and innovation, circular economy, development, environment, etc. Thirdly, and in parallel to these initiatives, a number of NGOs and some private companies have come out with the creation of rules and certifying instruments for the conduct of enterprises, the Voluntary Sustainability Standards, VSS. As it turns out, these VSS have become mandatory, given that the absence of VSS steps has become impediment to market access. This means that these groups have privatized a reference that became to be adopted by government and regulatory agencies out of the supervision and control of international rules. The VSS can be applied to every economic activity in several links of the productivity. In practice, despite its voluntary identification, they might negatively affect trade when importers submit consumption or import activities for specific norms. Worryingly, There are relatively high costs to implement VSS, which can hardly be dealt with by small and medium producers. Another difficulty to implement VSS is the tightness of norms. Too rigorous conditions require several changes in the productive processes, hence imposing implementation costs. And there is no clear additional financial return to incurring such costs. Furthermore, these issues became easier to be dealt with in accordance to the technical barriers to trade agreements, TT, as well as to the WTO agreement on the application of sanitary and phytosanitary measures, SPS agreement, both of which determine that no country will be forbidden to adopt barriers to protect human, animal, or vegetal life and health, to protect the environment, national security, etc. So you have a double movement in the same direction. Fourth, a fourth trail is the increasing emphasis on environmental, social, and corporate governance, the ESG. This has led to a booming of firms self-designated as capable of defining an ESG classification, and has led to the creation of far too many ESG indexes. This proliferation might be damaging to the extent that these agents adopt divergent measures and methodological concepts. Given this scenario, 5 initiatives that can be suggested as course of action for a middle-income developing economy are: number 1, to support the initiatives that might lead to reinforce the WTO in accordance to the interests of developing economies. Number 2, to adopt environmental policies so that its goods and services are considered as sustainable in the international market. Number 3, to create or stimulate a carbon market so as to be able to deal with the conflicts that might appear as an outcome of the adoption of the CBAM by the European Union. Number 4, to strengthen the communication about the application of ESS so that these tools might help make international trade more sustainable instead of a set of barriers to trade. Number 5, to deepen studies so that ESG regulation adopted by the country be harmonized with international procedures. As per the industrial sector, and here I finish, developing economies should reconsider the traditional position of obstructing negotiations while the agricultural sector is not negotiating. The industrial sector should not follow the agricultural sector. There should be clear division, and the industrial sector should look for its genuine interests. So these would be my provocations.
Thank you, Professor Bowman. And thank you for your contribution, because it's really complementary, but adding a whole range of viewpoints to the previous 2 presentations. So I think it really sort of broadens the range of issues, and I won't go through them, but your 4 major tracks, and you're particularly in the first track proposal that you mentioned about the EU for the CTE reform become the most important institution right now. It's going to be interesting to watch where that goes, with the EU pushing it. Your concerns about the EU private companies and the VSS, I think is certainly the first time I heard of this, and I think it's something to be obviously closely watched and followed. And I think your 5 initiatives should all be taken seriously, and hopefully in the proceedings from this conference they will be highlighted. So thank you very much. Now turn to Professor Suma Patri from the School of Public Policy at the Indian Institute of Technology.
So I have no very little on climate change, but a lot more on trips. So my contribution is going to the focus TRIPS was intended to create a global market, and although it was contested by several developing countries, led by it was passed into international law in 1990, with the concession that implementing TRIPS was allowed to be determined by each country in their national interest. TRIPS also contained a number of measures, provisions such as compulsory license, which countries could use it in their national interest. The general consensus about TRIPS is that it did succeed in increasing the volume in trade. The two key studies that demonstrated this effectively were the France which showed that implementation of stronger IPR and TRIPS led to more multinational technologies being transferred to the subsidiaries located in those countries where those IPR was in another paper, Sunil Kanwar has shown that the volume of trade in developing countries increased with TRIPS. And he also makes a quite important observation that this increase was primarily due to the extensive market. That is, as more and more commodities came under the ambit of patented technologies due to TRIPS, and so the trade in those commodities also increased. So these are both quite well cited studies. So while there are other problems with TRIPS, it did manage to have some measure of the diffusion and trade in international. It increased the volume of trade and investment in international economies. So the main challenge to TRIPS was also noted earlier by Nagesh, came from the rapid spread of HIV in Africa. And I mentioned this because there are so many parallels that we could take away that seems to climate change what happens. So the major problem was that confronted with rising debts due to the high price of red wine, a direct consequence of the stronger patents, African nations found it hard to impose compulsory. Cheap generics, which again led by India and Brazil, actually saved the day. And patent pooling was the response by the White House and organ of the government in order to promote the generic manufacturing. So in that case, the argument that was made was that the producers in India and Brazil were willing to infringe patents on the grounds that there was a big humanitarian cost. And I think that was the argument that actually won the day. So a strong argument was made on ethical and moral grounds for infringing the patents of pharma company, and the WHO responded to this problem by creating the medicine, where the essential patents required for the manufacturing required. So at a nominal rate to entry for the manufacturing. Climate change, like public health and like the HIV, is a global public good. And the vast majority of climate change technologies are actually held in developed countries. So really the problem of technology transfer, I don't know why I'm looking at this, okay, it's here. The problem of technology transfer is that how do I take a climate friendly technology, that's called, I call it that's climate change mitigating technology, where the innovation has taken place in Japan, how do I transfer it to a country like Brazil, let's say, which needs it? And there are the EPO, European Patent Office, has identified several patent classes as climate change mitigating technologies. So if you look at where does the innovation takes place, this sort of shows you the concentration of technology. So the top 3 countries, the 3 originating countries, hold about more than half the patents in those classes. And if we take the top 15 countries, more than 90% of the patents are held by them. And the only country that we may think of as developing in this is actually China, which at the start of this whole thing was a middle income country, but by the end of the period has become a high income country. So what we see is that when we look at a measure of technology transfer, which is patents that were produced in, let's say, Japan, but then registered also in the country like Brazil. This can be a volume measure of the number of technologies transferred, because normally companies would register a patent in the foreign country only to produce there or to trade there, protect their markets. So it's a kind of volume measure of technology transfer. And if I plot this over time, you can see the influence of TRIPS. TRIPS did actually succeed in increasing the rate of technology transfer. But this process has inexplicably slowed down after 2009. So this has gone largely unnoticed. I mean, the seminal paper which made this point that strong IPR did promote the transfer of technologies, looked at data up until 2008, and it concluded that, yeah, IPR was fine technologies from northern to southern countries for Asian purposes. In my own work, I did a replication exercise where I looked at the same sort of estimation, but for a later period, 2009 to 2013, and we find quite different results. 2018, we find quite different results. We find that, in fact, and you can see this on the graph, I don't need to put up regressions, but the extent of technology transfer measured by the same index starts falling. And if you also look at the numbers of patented technologies or any other measure, you see this kind of break up in 2009. So the question is, why did that happen? And here, of course, the climate change governance is an important part of the explanation. So what happens up until 2009 is that there is this Paris Accord, which creates a huge global market for climate change, because the accord commits countries to bring down carbon emissions, which have to be done within a specified time. And in this context, trade is the best way to acquire these products. But this approach to bringing down global emissions was sort of not adhered to after 2009, because there was an impasse in the Copenhagen. So the Copenhagen Accord of 2009 basically made it a question of voluntary restraint for countries to bring down their emissions. There were no targets. And this immediately shrank the international market. Because now it makes sense, I think, for countries to keep this production of these technologies within their own borders, as there was no time limit nor any urgency required for undertaking this transformation with them. So in these new scenarios, we find that IPR makes no difference. In fact, what is needed is more investment in climate change technologies. Now, the question I want to end my presentation with is to ask, can the mechanisms that we used to improve the international diffusion of public health technologies also work for climate change? It's more speculative, but I suggest that there is some scope to explore this question. And there are two main instruments that we used in the context of public health. The first instrument was compulsory licensing. And compulsory licensing is not an easy provision to use because it is too restrictive. We don't need to talk about the specifics of climate change. It's too restrictive even during COVID, and there was the international health. So everybody agrees that something needs to be done about compulsory licensing, and this may be the moment to grasp the net environment, grasp the net. The other thing I want to report on is a study on eco-patent formats. So this was a voluntary patent created by companies that own climate change technologies. So the three biggest contributors to this patent were Xerox, IBM, and Bosch. They contribute to the largest number of technologies. And in 2018, Contria, Stoll, and Helmers provided an evaluation of that patent formats. How far did it help in the diffusion of climate-friendly technologies. So patent commons deposits patents and says that I will overlook any infringement of this patent as long as you're taking out. Right? So that's the meaning of the patent. What they find is that this did not make that much of a difference, partly because this was a supply-led industry. So it was done by firms rather in response to demand, which was medical patent. Financing has emerged as a new alternative, but the jury is out on how much finance is available and how far it has facilitated technology transfer. I would end by stating, I mean, I don't want to repeat the points that you have said and Anisha said, but I want to end by stating that there is one other model which has not yet been considered, and this is the telecom firms model, where they bundle the necessary patents together and charge a FRAND fee. So FRAND stands for fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory licensing. So the essential patents that are required, which conform to particular standards of the sort that Professor Morgan was talking about, could be bundled and supplied, as a bundle of patents that can be licensed. So that's another sort of way forward. It's not patent pooling, but something else. Okay, I'll stop here and look forward to this with the panel.
Thank you, Professor Patri, for again a really value-added presentation, because it firstly went further in depth into an area that has been raised, but there hasn't been time to go into TRIPS agreement, but with a lot of empirical data, with some surprising results and some not so surprising. But I think your big question is an important question to look at, and I don't think too many people have looked at TRIPS and public health to see what lessons might offer for climate change issue with the TRIPS. So I think that that's the big takeaway from your presentation, and I hope people will look into that. And thank you very much for your presentation. Last but not least, we have Dr. Prerna Prabhakar from the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. And then I hope there will be time for some Q&A. And I'll make some remarks. Conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malhotra, for interesting, insightful initial remarks, and to my fellow panelists for adding to the rich discussion. Before I begin the discussion, some details about where I come from. So the Council on Energy, Environment and Water is a leading policy research institution and is among world's top climate think tanks. Our mandate is to impact sustainable development at scale with data, integrated analysis, and strategic outreach. The Council's research industrial sector. Now, we take this balance, to facilitate the journey of energy transition by balancing it with the trade routes. So, when we talk about trade, there are two key policy instruments in the form of trade or tariff measures and non-tariff or trade measures. So, as green energy liberalization approach and certain intermediate goods. And for India, a recent move in its budget to offer custom duty exemption for goods and machinery for battery manufacturing that go into electric vehicles was a welcome move. And what I propose is that it should be replicated for other sunrise sectors like green hydrogen, for which India has committed a huge target to be reached by 2030. So, in terms of tariff policies, our aim should be manufacturing. We need to trade for certain critical intermediate goods and applications. Moving on to the second instrument, which is a non-tariff or trade measure. As according to OCTA's data on measures, it can be seen that these measures cover 90% of global trade. The key characteristic is that mostly these measures are implemented or imposed by environmental aspect of these measures. It can be seen that 90% of non-tariff measures have certain environmental context. So when we talk about measures, I'm going to touch upon three kinds: labeling requirements, subsidies. So it has been discussed at length in the discussion before I started. Tariff expense factors are just mechanism that exports to the European Union will be taxed based on the carbon content. So it is kind of based on the carbon content of the exports that would go to the European Union. Then domestic support of subsidies like the US Inflation Reduction Act that was also discussed. And also I will talk about this one, the United Kingdom's contract for difference policy, which is kind of financial support to low carbon energy generation, which is based on local content, and it has already been disputed in the WTO, European Union. Now focusing on certain labeling related measures, which we will be impacted by in the coming future. First is going to be the EU's eco-design regulation for textiles. Which will be implemented in towards the end of 2023, and will be based basically on the content requirement or the minimum recyclability of the content that goes into making textiles and garments. Because of such requirements and a possible import duty on the material content of the exports that enter the European Union, it is going to be a restrictive parameter or a measure for India's exports, and it's going to be critical because out of India's total, the export basket, textile constituted around 12% in 2021. So showing a significant, importance of this sector for India's exports. A second announcement, which happened last year, was on the green steel deal between the European Union and the United States, where they are likely to impose curbs based on the carbon content of steel and aluminum coming from countries that do not join this. First of all, it's clearly not understood what are these standards based on. So definition of these standards and labeling is unclear. And anyway, the country which is not complying with these high carbon standards would face certain restrictions or impediments in terms of entering the European Union or the United States market. So these are some of the examples of ways in which such measures, which are implemented in the name of environmental safety, would act as a barrier for market access for a developing country like India. Now, given these facts, like the non-tariff measures and the tariff measures, and how can this be used to facilitate this journey of energy transition in the industrial sector? So what can be the way forward? So I propose these 4 points. First of all, the purpose of this government support needs to be understood. It's very critical to understand what is this government support for. Is it actually for facilitating the energy transition, energy access, or the nature of the support is in the form that it is export facilitating and import restrictive. So it needs to be, the clearly distinction should be made, whether it is to aid the energy transition process or it is to restrict inputs. Secondly, what I propose is that there should be a platform where all the countries can come together and at the very inception stage to develop these measures, labeling standards when these are being designed. And India's G20 presidency is an ideal platform for countries to be discussing their insights and their views to develop such standards. And from a very early stage, that is a critical point. So it should not be that we oppose that WTO standard is put in place, but from a very inception stage, the key discussion points should be deliberated on a common platform. Thirdly, I feel that a country like India should focus on innovation and technology upgradation and partner with like-minded countries. Because at the end, when countries across the world are implementing such measures, it's very important to be at a level playing field and have the technology to comply with such standards. Fourthly, to facilitate a transparent system, there should be a standardized framework to report and track such measures, and particularly for things like green subsidies, there should be a platform or a framework where these green subsidies are estimated, reported, tracked, and estimated in a continuous manner. Fifth point, which I have not included here, but is that environmental goods agreement, which was initiated, the talks initiated in 2014, but was stalled in 2016, could be revived with two conditions from developing countries' perspective. The non-tariff measures should be brought under the ambit of the EGA, the environmental goods agreements, and should be negotiated from developing countries' point of view. And the coverage of the goods should be expanded and diversified to take into account certain goods in which the developing countries like India have advantage in, rather than just focusing on certain industrial goods in which the developed countries are, have the comparative advantage. Lastly, I'll just briefly talk about what CEW is planning in this direction. First of all, the aim is to bridge the gap, information gap that exists in this domain. To first of all, just get together all the information on such measures that exist and how is it impacting India particularly. And secondly, when we have talked to the industry, we feel, especially the small and medium enterprises, the industries are not well aware of such measures in terms of how are they going to impact their export access when they enter the global market. So it's very important to deliberate with the industry as stakeholders to make them aware of these measures and to build their capacity to respond to such measures when they reach the global markets. I'll end there and look forward to the.
Thank you, Dr. Kudakar. Again, you brought in a whole lot of new points, new dimensions. So thank you very much. I think you have now a very broad range of points that have been covered, and hopefully the organizers and reporters will be able to capture them. Let me just highlight a couple, and I'm very pleased that you started, given what I said in my inaugural opening remarks about the crucial nature of multilateralism for the green energy transition and for global international institutions. As I said, whether it's UN or whether it's multilateral development banks. So I think you also made the point that there should be, in a sense, a different set of rules, more gradual trade liberalization for sunrise sectors and other carve-outs, etc., for sunrise sectors. And this, again, as I've said earlier, and has been stated, particularly by Dr. Chong, there are flexibilities, there are ways in which these carve-outs can be managed without dramatically trying to be in trade rules. You focused on tariff and non-tariff barriers and how these can be used to facilitate this journey. for the green transformation. And you made the point, I think very important point, that if there are going to be standards as non-tariff barriers, which has been a point of contention for many years, particularly with the EU, for many developing countries, it would help enormously if developing countries are included from the beginning in the discussion of those standards rather than them being unilaterally imposed on. So thank you again for these and many other points you made. And thank you again to all the speakers. I'm going to, as Nagesh did with the previous session, open it up for about 10 minutes, hopefully, of Q&A. So if I can, I'll take all the questions first in the interest of time, and then give the chance to the panelists to respond to them. Yeah. So we'll go first there.
Anjali can be first, ladies first.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll give a preference to the lady.
Okay.
No, I'll give preference to the lady first.
Okay, then done. I thought you were reluctant.
Not reluctant at all. I saw your hand first, but I'll give preference to the lady first, followed by you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and especially like all five panelists for bringing different debate questions on the table. As I thought, you're talking.
Yeah.
We were trying to discuss how can we reform the existing trade order, IP orders to facilitate green transition. And this is largely maybe through supporting easier technology transfer, easier and cheaper as well, or through the ability to employ local content requirements for facilitating of indigenous green industrialization or green transformation in general. But in parallel, there is something called as development of carbon markets, which is being pushed aggressively by EU through its CBAM initiative, which is going to come into place very soon. So are these two things conflicting with each other? Will they have conflicting results for developing countries like India? For instance, when we talk of carbon markets, essentially what is being done is to develop carbon markets. So a company or a country or an industry in a host is able to trade for its carbon inefficiencies vis-a-vis somebody else who's innovative. So this effectively probably will allow us or developing countries to be able to trade at a cost without indulging in core innovation. So in that sense, our ability, our ask for reforming trade reforms will probably be diluted or defeated if we let these carbon markets to operate in the way they are, particularly if they are being designed in a cap and trade format rather than if they were based on a performance-based criteria, where the firm will get credits only if it improves its intensity of carbon. So this is fine.
Thank you. So,
Kamal, from 1988 onwards, as in the midst of WTO and TRIPS related, I was the co-convener of the National Working Group on Patent Laws in WTO. Kamal, you have attended some of our meetings, if you can recall that. You've been making this point time and again that about whether we can carve within the WTO a certain set of steps. I agree with you, we don't need to dismantle WTO, but I think there are quite a few agreements we need to really radically transform. And I'll take one example because time is short. Agreement on agriculture. There is one which will not allow us a green agrarian transition. More than 60% of the people are dependent. Whereas advanced capitalist countries, which have only 4% and 8% population, etc., have all the flexibilities and whereas our hands are completely tied. I don't want to get into the details. I can get into the what kind of whittling down of the AOAs my demands. Okay, so this is radical. May not be as radical as coming out of WTO, though I can see now, and there are many other movements which have made that particular demand. I am not making one, but AOA is one. Agriculture out of WTO. That's, I hope. I do not know whether that fits with your understanding of radical carve out or otherwise. Number one. Number two point which I want to take was Suma. And see, importation is working of patent in the trade sector. But importation is not technology transfer. Technology transfer is not also technology absorption, accumulation. Because you take the case of Maruti Suzuki, it's one of the highest outflows. If you continue to import dependent manufacturing is not going to allow you to either create jobs or go green as far as this is concerned. So you've got to keep in mind that what measures and what kind of steps that we are seeking as far as this is concerned with regard to compulsory licensing. Suma, I was member of the compulsory licensing committee of the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, etc. All the time the secretaries came, no, our foreign direct investment would be impacted. There are trade-offs. Then you have to depend upon very different routes to investment. It's possible. If you are looking at the question of technology indigenization, technology absorption, and assimilation, one of the important things was manufacturing capacity. And if there's a hollowing out of the manufacturing, which we have seen in the case of India, as far as it's concerned, it has much less to do with trips. It has much less to do with trims. And investment space we had as far as it's concerned. We can look at what we require. We need to look at standards agreement, subsidy agreement. I do not have time to get into the details of that, and including my South Korean friend has brought non-exportable subsidy into discussion. I would like to look at your paper in very detail. I am concerned about it. Our flexibility in subsidies, be with regard to R&D or green, should not be taken away. This is what the WTO did. We were constrained. Our policy space was reduced. We don't want it to be further reduced as far as it's concerned. And I hope whenever we have negotiations on FED, we will keep it in mind the experience of the last 30 years. WTO plus won't do it. Let me put it this way. FTAs are going in that direction. They're using even sustainable development, climate as a barrier, like rightly Prerna pointed that out. I think we need to be very clear about the first point which Kamal made. Human development is the end. Shared prosperity is the end, and not prosperity of few companies. Are the companies willing to take obligations? No. We are all regulating states. We are not willing to regulate transnational capital. WTO is finally all about freedom for transnational capital. Should we give all freedom? We gave them all freedom, and they brought the havoc, climate change, and the disaster.
Thank you. Any other questions? I'll take one last. I could see one and okay, please. Yeah, that's
yeah.
Last question.
Yeah, this is a comment to Professor Suma's last observation. So he he basically made a point whether we can learn any lesson from the public health exemptions provided in the agreement. See, if you look at the recent developments, what we see is that the existing provisions is not really workable or not really useful. That is why, in the context of COVID, actually some kind.
Okay, not just for some specific activity, because the nature of technologies are changing, especially the vaccines and biopharmaceutical technology are becoming important components. So if you would like to draw parallels, maybe you also need to get into the nature of technology in the technology area to draw parallels in.
Would like to address questions, comments that have been made. Yeah, I can start. I'll give everyone a minute.
Okay.
1 minute.
So I had 8 minutes. I could not make all my points there. Okay. So the carbon markets question, you don't want to address all the questions? Just 1 minute.
Just address the
So one which I think is most important. Okay.
Just in the interest.
Okay. So let me address then Professor Abrol's point that you are stressing indigenous green industrialization. But there's a time criticality to the, the whole process of transition. And so, like some of my colleagues on this table also said, multilateralism will have to be given. Also because it's a global public good, it's not just a national public. So I feel that, to say that, no, I mean, we cannot have any imported technology, this won't work, is maybe not a luxury we have, given that the urgency of this is that if we don't cut down emissions in the next 20 years, basically we've reached a kind of tipping point and the entire planet is changing. So that's my view on this. And if we want to use the multilateralism and if we want to use the fact that the technologies exist and we need to adapt them, then yes, I agree with you that we should take care that there should be a technology transfer element. But that's not the same thing as saying that we throw the baby out.
Thank you.
Supplementary during the meeting.
Dr. Prabhakar.
Yeah, I would like to take Anjali's point. So, I think that India, for example, is already in place. It's it has plans in place for introducing the emission trading scheme, which will be launched soon, and it will be based on cap and trade. And then based on that, given that all the countries would be having some form of ETS or then based on that, when we export to the European Union, there'll be a price, which we will have to pay based on the carbon content of our exports to the European Union. The key here is like for us to be prepared, to be competitive once the CBAM is introduced. What I feel is that the reporting mechanism in the country has to be strengthened. First of all, measuring carbon and reporting and measuring framework for all the countries, to be competitive once CBAM is introduced would be critical for us to stay competitive. So, yeah, that's a logistic thing that I would want to mention about.
Being provocative, I think we all miss the old WTO when life was simpler and we are dealing with tariffs and trading goods. Now we have exchange rate affecting, we have technology changing, we have overall climate challenge affecting all of us, and we don't have the instrument to deal with it. So we have, and of course we have the political economy behind all those things that are increasingly more sophisticated. So the challenge is how to identify what is good and what is bad, and try somehow to get some multilateral rules, be it WTO or elsewhere. So I think there's no answer to that now. We are in the middle of a very rapid changing process.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think Dinesh reminded us of the very touchy, very sensitive, very vigorous debates that used to be there in the days of WTO negotiations, Cancun, and all that. But I agree with you that working of building is not necessarily transportation. It's a fast as it can answer, but it is not. Yeah. So, and the other point, I think, Anjali, CBAM is carbon border adjustment is actually a protectionist intent, and that is what the problem is. So everybody is concerned about that.
Yes, thank you very much. Now we observe the tarification, subsidy, local content. So everything we observed in 1990. And so because of the green transformation, we all accept all these kind of measures. So now it's the age of subsidy and the age of distrust, I think, right? So we need to more, introduce the transparency on each sector and of the issues on the table, and then and the taxonomy is not enough. to handling all kind of the problems arising from heat subsidization. And because of the greenwashing, we cannot guarantee that any kind of measures taken by each countries, whether it's a greenwashing or not. Okay, each companies and each governments and actions measures, they cannot have a trust on all of these kind of measures now. So we need to talk about these issues in Geneva. But what I'm thinking is that we need to clarify, and second, we need to seek the more gradual change or measures rather than the drastic reform. How to introduce the new measures to harmonize the multilateral trade rules and multilateral environmental agreement. We need to seek the kind of the rooms how to harmonize. So I think that we need to talk about these issues not only in Geneva but also in G20 and the G7 and the many other fora, international fora, including APEC, which is South Korea is one of them, and also the United States is now the hosting country. So all of this kind of international forums, we think about these issues. That's my hope. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think that's been quite a rich discussion, like the first session. Before I thank the panelists and the audience, I'd like to just make 3 points on my side. First, there's clearly a need for rethinking multilateral trade agreements and treaty language, and the need for at least carve-outs, at the very least, for renewable energy, green energy transition, similar to the historical precedent carve-outs, which have existed with respect to subsidies. I won't mention agriculture or fisheries, given that you've stated that there's need to even expunge the agreement on agriculture. But there have been carve-outs, and at the very least, there's a need for that. Second, and it strikes me, I think probably strikes everyone, that when the WTO was created, there was almost no attention given to this whole issue of climate change, environmental agreements, and it was really marginal. And even the definition of environmental goods is not clear, as someone stated. So I would argue that the next WTO ministerial conference should prioritize or even be dedicated to clarifying the role of trade policy in tackling climate change. More broadly, to enable trade rules to be transformed to allow a competitive and viable renewable energy industry, which is like a tech case, as we've said before, to emerge across multiple countries, including many in the global south. And I think this session of this discussion has identified at least 5 areas within existing WTO trade rules that either need to be radically transformed, or flexibility is exercised, or maybe even expunged, as you said. I don't know if that will happen, but I'll list at least 5, and this is not a complete list, but clearly TRIPS, clearly TRIMS, clearly the whole compatibility with multilateral environmental agreements, and giving precedence in many ways to enforceability of multilateral environmental agreements, non-actionable subsidies being revisited in terms of what they are or what they cover. I know you're shaking your head, you don't agree, but I'm here to reflect the conversation. Yeah, sure. Revisited or reintroduced in a green sensitive manner. And of course, the agreement on agriculture, which always looms very large, particularly for a country like India, as it has for over 2 decades. So these are just some of my thoughts. And in conclusion, this is a continuing discussion. I would like to thank each and every panelist for their very significant contribution. And I'd like to thank once again ISID, Dr. Nagesh Kumar, as well as, of course, the institution I'm representing, the Boston University Global Development Policy Center, for jointly hosting this very important event and session. Thank you very much.
To take 5 minutes. Yeah, we will. I think this was like the previous one. This was also very, very rich discussion. And I'm sure everyone enjoyed this, and we will put together something to capture the essence of what has been discussed. I want to invite my colleague Reggie Joseph to sort of do some kind of concluding remarks, and we wrap up.
Yeah. Since we are already running late of time, so I will briefly touch upon some of the key messages that came out during today's discussion. One is that we need a new multilateralism. So we need reformed global financial institutions because the developing countries need to be better represented. Similarly, we also need a reformed WTO so that it becomes more sustainable oriented. And in this context, the TRIPS and TRIMS need to be reviewed, especially with their focus on technology transfer and more policy space for adopting policies for oriented towards economic development. The other key message is that there is a need for evolving climate finance architecture. Because huge financial resources are required to adapt to the changing climate. And for developing countries, including China, more than $2 trillion are required. It's a huge financial resources. So much of these resources need to come from outside the developing world. So as of now, the suggestion is that the private sector would be a source of funding, but it will come at a higher cost. The question is whether this would be sustainable. So there is a need for exploring sustainable financing options. At the same time, there is also a need for developing appropriate capacities. So we need to develop capability for identifying right projects, then monitoring the project implementation. Similarly, to evaluate whether certain measures are macroeconomically sustainable. So these are the key general messages came out during the discussions. We also discussed about the key initiatives that India has taken. So I will not go into those details. So the discussions we had today, so we are planning to bring out as a policy brief. Now I would like to thank everyone, the distinguished delegates and the participants for making today's discussions very rich and insightful. So now I will invite you all for a tea outside. Thank you. Thank you, Lily.